Ooh. All right. Yeah, where's something's missing here. Okay, here we go. Ba-bam. Okay, you didn't see that. Let me get back up here right now. All right. Maybe I should cut off that first part. All right. Scylla and Charybdis. James Joyce. James Joyce, Ulysses. I mean, here we are. Here's the book. I mean, all those books. I mean, Ulysses came out in 1922. It's been out for 100 years. We're still reading it. There's 3,000 books about this book. You know, as much as Shakespeare, the Bible, any other book. So tell me what book is going to have that many books written about it. James Joyce. So we're kind of halfway through the book, in chapter 9. I mean, this chapter is kind of one of the reasons why. I mean, you see this also in Dostoevsky and Thomas Mann, The Magic Mountain. You know, like why this book is so great. I mean, where should I start though? Let me kind of look through it. Okay, Urbane to comfort them, the Quaker librarian purred. And we have we not? And we have we not? Those priceless pages of Wilhelm Meister, a great poet on a great brother poet, hesitating soul, taking arms against the sea of trouble, torn by conflicting doubts, as one sees in real life. He came a step, a sink, a pace forward on the neat's leather creaking, and a step backward, a sink a pace on the solemn floor. A noiseless attendant setting open the door, but slightly made him a noiseless beck. Directly, said he, creaking to go, albeit lingering, the beautiful, effectual dreamer who comes to grief against hard facts. One always feels that Goethe's judgments are so true in the largest analysis. Twice creakingly analysis, he carantoed off, bawled, most zealous by the door. He gave his large ear all to the attendant's words, heard them, and was gone. Two left. Monsieur de la Palisse, Stephen sneered, was alive 15 minutes before his death. Have you found those 6 brave medicals? John Eglinton asked of the elders Gaul to write Paradise Lost at your dictation. The sorrows of Satan, he calls it. Smile, smile, Cranley, smile. First he tickled her, then he patted her, then he passed the female catheter, for he was a medical, jolly old medic. I feel you would need one more for Hamlet. 7 is dear to the mystic mind. The shining 7, WB calls him. Glitter-eyed, his rufous skull, close to the green-capped desk lamp, sought the face, bearded amid dark greenish shadow, an olive, holy-eyed. He laughed low, a sizer's laugh of Trinity unanswered. Orchestral Satan, weeping many a rude tears, such as the angels weep at Igli via del Cuvato Trombetta. He holds my follies hostage. Cranley, 11 true Wicklow men to free their sire's land. Gap-toothed Kathleen, her 4 beautiful green fields. The stranger in her house, and one more to hail him. Ave, Rabbi, the Tinahele 12. In the shadow of the glen, he cooees for them. My soul's youth I gave him, night by night, Godspeed, good hunting. Mulligan has my telegram, folly persists. Our young Irish bards, John Eglinton censured, have yet to create a figure which the world will set beside Saxon Shakespeare's Hamlet, though I admire him as old Ben did on this side's idolatry. All these questions are purely academic, Russell oracled. out of his shadow. I mean, whether Hamlet is Shakespeare or James the First or Essex, clergymen's discussions of the historicity of Jesus, art has to reveal to us ideas, formless spiritual essence. The supreme question about a work of art is out of how deep a life does it spring. The paintings of Gustave Moreau is a painting of ideas. The deepest poetry is Shelley. The words of Hamlet bring our minds into contact with eternal wisdom. Plato's world of ideas. All the rest is speculation of schoolboys for schoolboys. AE has been telling some Yankee interviewer, well, wall tarnation strike me. The school men were schoolboys first, Stephen said, super politely. Aristotle was once Plato's schoolboy, and he remains so, one should hope, John Ingleton sedately said. One can see him, a model schoolboy with his diploma under his arm. He laughed again, and now smiling bearded face. Formless spiritual, Father, Word, and Holy Breath, all Father, the heavenly man. He, Essos Christos, magician of the beautiful, the Logos who suffers in us at every moment. This verily is that. I am the fire upon the altar. I am the sacrificial butter. Dunlop, Judge, the noblest Roman of them all. A.E. Arvel, the name ineffable. In heaven, height, K.H., their master whose identity is no secret to adepts, brothers of the great white lodge, always watching to see if they can help the Christ with the bride sister, moisture of light, born of an ensouled virgin, repentant Sophia, departed on the plane of the Buddha. The life esoteric is not for the ordinary person. OP must work off his bad karma first. Mrs. Cooper Oakley once glimpsed our very illustrious sister, HPB's elemental. Oh, fie, out on Fuit, I don't even know how to say it. You nodded to look, Mrs. So you nodded when a lady's a showing of her elemental. Mr. Best entered, tall, young, mild, light. He bore in his hand with a grace a notebook, new, large, clean, bright. That model schoolboy, Stephen said, would find Hamlet's musing about the afterlife of his princely soul, the improbable, insignificant, and undramatic monologue as shallow as Plato's. So yeah, this is like where I've been reading quite a bit. Where Stephen Dedalus, like we've been kind of following Bloom for a couple chapters, 5 chapters. So we get to chapter 9, and they're at the library and they're talking about Stephen's theory of Hamlet, and there's like some, and so this, let me just look how long this goes. But this goes on for a while, and I think Bloom shows up in the. Yeah, Mulligan and Bloom both show up in the library. Everyone comes here, and there's a bit of a play there too. Wow, this chapter goes on for a while, up until 180. So this is a 30-page chapter. We were on page 150, and we switched to get to 180. So it's a 30-page chapter. It's the longest chapter so far, but it's a very complicated chapter because like Stephen Dedalus. So let's go over. Let's try to summarize what happens. Okay, so they're in the National Library. It's by now it's like 1 p.m. Stephen casually presents his Hamlet theory to John Eglinton and critic essayist A.E., a poet, and Leicester, a librarian and Quaker. Stephen contends that Shakespeare associated himself with the Hamlet's father, not with Hamlet himself. When the episode opens, Stephen is impatient and the older man's repetition of unoriginal received wisdom on Shakespeare. John Ingleton puts Stephen in his place by mockingly inquiring about his own literary accomplishments and lack thereof. From the corner, A.E. expresses disdain for Stephen's Hamlet theory, maintaining that biographical criticism is useless because one should only focus on the depth of the expressed by the art. Stephen responds to Eglinton's mockery of his youth, pointing out that Aristotle was once Plato's pupil. Mr. Best, the librarian, enters. He's been showing Douglas Hyde's love song of Canuck to Haynes. A.E. expresses his preference for Hyde's pastoral poem. Stephen continues with his theory by sketching a scene from Shakespeare's London. Shakespeare walks along the river to his own performance of Hamlet, where he plays not Hamlet, but the ghost of Hamlet's father. Stephen contends that Hamlet thus corresponds to Shakespeare's dead son, Hamnet, and unfaithful Gertrude represents Shakespeare's adulterous wife, Anne Hathaway. A.E. reiterates that a critic should focus on the work itself, not the details of the poet's life, such as his drinking habits or his death. Stephen recalls that he himself owes A.E. some money. Eglinton argues that Anne Hathaway is historically unimportant, and he cites biographers who depict Shakespeare's early marriage to Anne Hathaway as a mistake that he rectified by going to London. Stephen counters that geniuses make no mistakes. A.E. gets up to leave. He is expected elsewhere. He'll be at Moore's tonight. It's an Irish novelist. Buck and Haynes will be there. Leicester mentions that A.E. is compiling a volume of the work of young Irish poets. Someone suggests that Moore is the man to write the Irish epic. Stephen is resentful not to be included in the poetry collection, nor in their social circle. He vows to remember the snub. Stephen thanks A.E. for taking a copy of Deasy's letter for publication. Eglinton returns to the argument. He believes Shakespeare is Hamlet himself, and as Hamlet is such a personal character, Stephen argues that Shakespeare's genius was such that he could give life to many characters, still focusing on Anne Hathaway's adultery. Stephen points out that Shakespeare's middle plays are dark tragedies. His later, lighter plays testify through their young female characters to the rival of Shakespeare's granddaughter who reconciled the rift with his grandmother. Stephen makes another point. The ghost of Hamlet, father, inexplicably knows the means of his own murder and his wife's betrayal. Shakespeare has granted him the extraneous knowledge because the character is part Shakespeare himself. Buck, who has been standing in the doorway, mockingly applauds Stephen. Buck approaches Stephen and produces a cryptic telegram that Stephen sent to him at the ship instead of showing up himself. Buck playfully chides Stephen for standing him and Haynes up. A library attendant comes to the door and summons Leicester to help a patron, Bloom, to find the Kilkenny people. Buck recognizes Bloom standing in the hall and explains that he just saw Bloom in the National Museum eyeing the rear end of a goddess statue, implying that Bloom is a homosexual. Buck teasingly warns Stephen to beware of Bloom. Stephen continues, while Shakespeare was in London living the high life with many sexual partners and cheated on him back in Stratford, this hypothesis would explain why there's no mention of her in the play. Shakespeare will point only left her only his second best bed. England suggests that Shakespeare's father corresponds to the ghost of Hamlet's father. Stephen forcibly denies this supposition, insisting that the ghost of Hamlet's father is not Shakespeare's father, but Shakespeare himself, who was old and gray at the time of the play was written. Fathers, Stephen digresses, are inconsequential. Paternity is unprovable and therefore insubstantial. Fathers are linked to their children only by a brief sexual act. Stephen goes on to suggest that Anne cheated on Shakespeare with his brothers, Edmund and Richard, whose names appear in Shakespeare's plays as adulterous and usurping brothers. England asks Stephen if he believes his own theory, and Stephen says no. England asks why he should expect payment for her if he does not believe in it. Buck tells Stephen that it's time for a drink and they leave. Buck makes fun of England, a lonely bachelor. Buck reads aloud a play he was scribbling while Stephen argued it is a farce entitled Every Man His Own Wife or A Honeymoon in the Hand. As they walk out the back door, Stephen senses someone behind him. It is Bloom. Stephen steps away from Buck and Bloom passes between them down the stairs. Whispering again, Buck alludes jokingly to Bloom's homosexuality. Stephen walks down the steps feeling spent. Okay, so in episode 9 of Ulysses, we meet up again with Stephen, who we last saw headed to a pub with some men from the Freeman's office. He never met Haynes and Buck at the ship pub at 12:30 as they had arranged this morning. Instead, Stephen wound up here, the National Mute Library, performing his Hamlet theory. Stephen is trying to interest Eglinton and AE in publishing the theory and his own talent in general. Stephen's presentation is hardly formal. It is rather takes the shape of discussion between men of letters. There are frequent interruption and digression. Stephen ad libs using thoughts and words of others from earlier in the day. Episode 9 corresponds to the Odysseus trial by sea, in which he must sail between Scylla, the six-headed monster situated on a rock, and Charybdis, a deadly whirlpool. The concept of negotiating between two extremes plays out several times within this episode, and most notably in the Platonic Aristotle dichotomy. Dichotomy? How do you say that? That Stephen mentions. Like Odysseus, Stephen sails closer to Scylla, and thus Stephen's thoughts and theories owe more to Aristotle's grounded material logic sense of the world. The alignment explains why Stephen grounds Shakespeare's work in the lived reality of Shakespeare's life, where AE separates the man from the external ideas expressed in his work. Like Odysseus, Stephen cannot sail too close to Scylla's rock, though, and the threat of extreme materialism is represented by Buck and his physically based humor. Stephen also has to negotiate his desire for acceptance from literary men as Eglinton and AE, and his disdain for such men for their movement, the Irish literary revival. Stephen is scornful of AC's mysticism and England's superiority, but he's also bitterly sad at not being considered for AE's compilation. Part of the reason Eglinton and others seem resistant to Stephen's Hamlet theory is that the theory is less a traditional piece of literary criticism investigation than it is imaginative performance of one poet understanding another poet. We have seen Stephen in the first 3 episodes of Ulysses struggling with the circumstances of his own life and history, trying to understand how he can either incorporate them or create art. Stephen's theory of Hamlet shows that Shakespeare often wrote his life and times into the work, and thus presents examples how masterpieces can still be tied to realities of lived experience. Stephen's meditation on paternity take on a particular urgency in episode 9. Stevens envisions ideal paternity as the literary creation. He argues that Shakespeare is not merely a father to his son Hamlet, but to all humanity. Stevens' further arguments about the tenacity of the father-son relationship and the insignificance of fathers relates to his own experience of the alienation of his own father. Much of Stephen's Hamlet theory seems to develop out of his own life, and we see Stephen thinking about parallel personal matters, his mother, his sexuality, and so on. The cameo appearance of Bloom in the episode reminds us of the sonless Bloom suitability as a replacement father figure for Stephen. The schematics for the chapter reinforces this sense, though Stephen himself seems to be the Odysseus figure for a time in Scylla and Charybdis in the schematic of Shakespeare, but Bloom seems to be the father figure Shakespeare and Stephen the son Hamlet. Bloom is aligned with Shakespeare through their similarly unfaithful wives and dead sons, Hamlet and Rudy, respectively. As Shakespeare writes the drama of his wife into his art, so we see Bloom considering writing a story based on Molly at the end of episode 4. Okay, so there you have it. So, I mean, yeah, the play coast attention. I mean, this is like the most, kind of interesting conversation in the whole book. I mean, like in Thomas Mann, they have the two main characters like start talking in French like for like 30 pages and stuff, and it's like and stuff. This is like that one, like, or this is like this part is like the Grand Inquisitor and Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. It's like a real important, he's talking about Shakespeare and art and father and everything. Like in the last chapter, they were talking about eating and going to the bathroom, how life is, eating and pooping and stuff. Now art it's generated by the father, and goes out into the world and all that. And how do we even like talk about art? Is it like when I in my literary criticism thing, there's 5 schools of literary criticism. There's genetic, which has to do with the biography. There's the other one, the formalism, which is like the text. We only focus on the text. There's mimetic, which is more about realism and history. There's also reader response, and so like it's like, and then the last one is intertextual, which is more complicated. All texts come from other texts. It's all, which Joyce definitely relies on the history of literature with his books and stuff. So we were talking about Lestrygonians and Bloom, and now we were talking about the big library chapter, Scylla and Charybdis, chapter 9. So we've got to 9 chapters of the book. Next is the Wandering Rocks, which is it's 18 short chapters, kind of going. It's almost like a documentary film. So that's what's coming next. So yeah, so I hope you're enjoying Ulysses and my ruminations about it. It's always a pleasure to come back and read this book every few years and come back to it, and it's like a familiar friend at this point. And yeah, we'll be reading a lot of books, a lot of my favorite books of the 20th century in the next couple months. And so, I mean, we started this I think in the 1st of July, and now it's almost the end of the month. So I guess we'll probably have this done sometime in August. Okay, so this got a little long, but that's it. Okay. And chapter 9. See you in the next one, chapter 10.